Chapter 9. Setting a Trap. There was no escape for the Hardys. The ledge was too narrow. They were trapped by the deadly reptiles. The steep drop below the cave cut off all chance of rapid descent. While the two rattlers slithered toward their exposed ankles, Frank and Joe raised their arms in an attempt to ward off the strike from the reptile coiled just above them. Crack! The shot of a pistol was followed, in a split second, by the unmistakable smack of a bullet hitting home. The snake's long body exploded straight upward, writhing, and then fell with a thud at the Hardys' feet. Startled, the two other rattlers retreated into the cave. "Off the ledge, quick!" cried Frank. Scrambling backward, both boys hung for an instant by their fingertips from the ledge. In another moment they were grasped firmly by Chet Morton and Walter Donner, who had climbed up the steep rock face. Donner held in one hand the smoking long-barreled pistol which had ended the life of the deadly snake. When the four climbers were back on the ground, Sheriff Ecker wiped his brow in relief. "A close call," he declared, still shaken. "There wasn't a thing that we could do." "Lucky for us you decided to come up, Mr. Donner," Joe addressed the tall man gratefully. "And even luckier you can shoot so well." "We're certainly thankful that you were near enough to shoot," Frank added. "Your bullet must have caught that rattler right in the head." Walter Donner's face, usually so good-natured, had become serious and even stern. "I'm glad I happened to be here," he answered. "I hate to think of what would have happened otherwise. Suppose you boys had gone rushing up to that cave without looking where you were going, and I wasn't around? That would have been a terrible tragedy." Putting one arm around Chet's shoulders and another around Joe, Donner continued, "If you ever listen to anything, listen to me now. You can't be too careful in the woods. You never know where the danger is going to come from. Sometimes under your feet, sometimes over your heads. Snakes like to sun themselves on dry, rocky ledges. Don't climb around carelessly. Once you are in the wilderness, remember, caution, boys, always caution." "Mr. Donner," one of the deputies said empathetically, "I've got two boys at home, and I couldn't have said it better to them than you just did." "Yep," another agreed. "The woods is no place for kid stuff. You've got to be on the lookout." "It's true," Sheriff Ecker put in. "Most people who get into trouble in the woods just don't know any better. They can't tell directions, they're not careful where they step, and they forget to bring matches and so on. Always somebody coming up from town, getting lost in these mountains." "Well," Donner's voice became jovial again, "I'm sure these lads are going to be real careful after what happened today." He turned to the Hardys. "Maybe you'd better stay out of Black Hollow entirely. It's a dangerous place, especially with Simon throwing rocks at people. Besides, it seems certain your friend isn't here." Thwarted and disappointed at finding no trace of the missing captain, Frank, Joe, and Chet thanked the search party and returned to the cabin. Frank washed and dressed the stone cut on his brother's head. "How's it feel?" he asked. "Terrible. I have a corker of a headache." While Joe lay down to rest, Frank again studied the calendar notations made by the captain. Chet Morton busied himself getting supper. When it was ready, the stout boy called out cheerily, "Soup's on. Come and get it." Although Chet had outdone himself to produce the meal of steak, fried potatoes, and hot vegetables, the brothers hardly seemed to notice the food. They ate in thoughtful silence. Chet watched his two friends uneasily. "Still feeling blue about it?" he asked at last. "About what, Chet?" "About that lecture Donner gave us. He sure made it sound as if we're babes in the woods. Boy, did that get me mad for a minute there. Why, the three of us have been camping for years. I felt like telling him a thing or two." "So did I, Chet," Joe admitted ruefully. "But I couldn't because he'd just saved our lives. It really looked as if we were babes in the woods. Let's be fair, fellows, Frank put in. It's not true that we're not tenderfeet, but what happened was our own fault. We should have thought about the possibility of snakes. I know they're apt to be in the rocks as well as Donner does. A new idea suddenly crossed Frank's mind. As well as Donner does, he repeated thoughtfully. If he knows it, why didn't he warn us before we went up? Besides, he knows more than that. He knows every rock and tree in Black Hollow, as Sheriff Ecker told us. We trusted Donner's knowledge of the hollow. That's why we weren't careful. But who sent us up into that cave? Donner. That's right, Joe chimed in excitedly. And remember, he invited us to give up the search and to stay out of the hollow. There's something fishy about that man in his house. I know I heard a door open in the back, but there wasn't any sign of one in the kitchen. What I can't figure out, Frank went on, is why Donner would send us up into a den of rattlers and then save our lives. Because the only reason he climbed up along with us was to get within pistol range of the snakes. The sheriff and his men couldn't shoot. We were in the line of fire. Well, there's your answer, Joe declared forcefully. I believe it was Donner's idea to establish us as woeful, inexperienced boys in front of witnesses. Suppose some accident does happen to us down there. The sheriff won't be suspicious, because he thinks we don't know how to take care of ourselves. You mean that Donner might be planning to kill us and make it look like an accident? Chet asked. Who knows? Frank nodded seriously. Another thing, the rock throwing by Simon, the mute. Is he in league with Donner? Or was he perhaps throwing stones at us because we were with Donner? Joe frowned. It's a puzzler, all right, including Donner's resemblance to Colonel Thunder. Hey, I nearly forgot. Frank reached into his pocket and placed a shiny metal disc on the table. What's this? Asked Chet, picking it up. Oh, it's a dog tag. What's it say? Skippy? That's Bobby Thompson's little dog. Where did you find this? It was in the grass near Donner's front door. You think that Donner's been stealing dogs? Joe queried. Is he mixed up in some kind of animal racket? He said himself that there was an illegal market for dogs. Perplexed, Frank shook his head. You have me there. If he steals them, I can't figure out what he does with them. There aren't any around his house. That's true, Chet agreed. I took another look in the sheep pen. Nothing's in it but sheep. Could it be that Skippy just wandered off from the Thompsons and lost his tag down by Donner's? At that moment, the boy's own puppy could be heard noisily lapping up warm milk from a pan that Chet had put down for him. We can't let anything happen to Mystery, Chet finished anxiously. Hearing his name, the little beagle romped happily over to Chet's chair. Yes, Mystery, the chunky boy crooned, while the dog's tail thumped the floor. We won't let anything happen to you. All the same, I think tonight is the time to set our trap for the dog thief, Frank declared. Right, Joe agreed promptly. Mystery, old pup, you're gonna be the bait. Now wait a minute, fellas, Chet protested. I won't agree to this unless I'm sure we can safeguard Mystery. I think we can, said Frank. We'll just tie him up on the porch after dark. Chet and Joe, you watch from right inside the door at all times, and I'll hide at the side of the house. That way we ought to catch any dog napper that comes around. Accordingly, about 10 o'clock, the gasoline lanterns were turned out and the little cabin was in solid darkness. Heavy clouds, promising a storm later on, had begun rolling across the sky. The air was dense and still. Chet and Joe opened the cabin door quietly and led Mystery outside. After securing the dog's rope to the railing, the two withdrew to stand guard. From within, they could scarcely make out the dog in the total darkness. Soon afterward, Frank, wearing dark clothes, slipped out the back door and stationed himself between Captain Maguire's old car and the side of the cabin, a few steps from the porch. The youth sat down and waited, listening intently. Gradually, his eyes became accustomed to the night. Even so, he realized that a person advancing across the clearing, with the background of thick trees, would be nearly impossible to see. The night air seemed to grow heavier and warmer. Flickers of lightning began to play about the horizon. The thunder became louder. Suddenly, a streak of lightning lit up the clearing for a bare instant, and then the blackness closed down again. A tremendous thunderclap followed instantly. Frank checked his watch. It was nearly midnight. Another flash came, accompanied by a long roll of thunder. On the porch, the beagle whined. "The storm's nearly on top of us," Frank noted. Almost immediately came another white blaze of lightning and a fearful crash of thunder. The first heavy drops of rain pelted down. Mystery's whine suddenly changed into a frantic, high-pitched barking. Distracted for a moment by the storm's arrival, Frank hesitated an instant and then sprang forward. At that same moment, Joe and Chet burst out of the front door. Mystery was gone. The dog's yelping could be heard, but the sound grew fainter. A sheet of lightning made the clearing and the woods brighter than day. Frank, Joe, and Chet caught sight of a figure fleeing swiftly down the path into the hollow. "After him!" Joe shouted. Armed with flashlights, the three boys raced in pursuit. End of chapter 9.